Today is the 7th anniversary of the day my husband and I closed on our first house together, a small colonial in Naperville, Illinois, with a leaky garage roof and a kitchen that still smelled faintly of the previous owner's dog. We'd been fighting about money for most of the past year, the way couples do when one person's freelance income dries up and the other is quietly keeping score. But this morning, he woke up early, made coffee before I even stirred, and told me he had a whole evening planned. Just the two of us. I work as a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown. I say that not to brag, but because it matters later. My entire professional life is built around noticing what doesn't add up, a line item that's slightly too round, a date that shifts by one day across two documents, a name that appears once where it shouldn't. I am, by training and by instinct, a person who notices things. Which is probably why what happened that evening hit me so much harder than it might have hit someone else. I had spent 7 years not noticing the person who slept beside me. He spent the afternoon in the kitchen, which was unusual. My husband is the kind of man who considers pouring cereal a culinary achievement. But there he was, following a recipe on his iPad, sleeves rolled up, a dish towel tucked into his belt like he'd seen it done on television. He'd bought flowers, grocery store tulips already starting to nod, and set them in the glass vase we'd gotten as a wedding gift and never once used. The table was set properly. Folded napkins. The good plates. I stood in the doorway and thought for just a moment that maybe things were turning around. We were supposed to have dinner at 7. At 6:30, he told me he wanted to make me a proper cocktail to start. Something he'd seen on a bartending channel, he said. A gin spritz with elderflower and a twist of grapefruit. He was very specific about the grapefruit. He said the bitterness was important. I told him I loved the sound of it. I went upstairs to change. I was only up there for about 10 minutes, pulling on a dress I hadn't worn since before the pandemic, when I realized I'd left my phone downstairs charging on the kitchen counter. I came down quietly. Our stairs have a creaky third step that I've learned to skip after years of coming home late from client calls. And that's when I heard him. He was on the back porch off the kitchen, sliding door cracked open about 4 inches. His voice was low, the way it gets when he's talking about something he doesn't want me to hear, which I'd always assumed was sports betting or conversations with his brother that he knew I found draining. I paused on the bottom stair. I don't know why I didn't just walk in. Something in the pitch of his voice made my legs stop. "She's going to take half of everything," he said. "You understand that, right? Half the house, half the accounts. Her firm has forensic accountants on retainer. She knows exactly what to look for. If I file first, she will tear every single transaction apart." A woman's voice on the other end. I didn't recognize it, but it was calm, almost clinical. She said something I couldn't fully make out, and then my husband laughed, a short, dry sound I'd never heard from him before, like something clicking shut. "The policy pays out $2 million. Tax-free," he said. "And I've been paying the premiums for 4 years without saying a word about it. She doesn't even know it exists. That's the whole point. An accident is cleaner than a divorce. No division of assets. No attorneys. No paper trail from her going through the books." I don't remember making a decision to be still. My body simply stopped. The kind of stillness that happens before the brain has fully processed what the ears have delivered. I stood on that bottom stair, one hand on the banister, the other holding a pair of earrings I'd been about to put in, and I heard my husband calmly discuss the logistics of my death as though he were planning a weekend trip. "The drink should do it," he said. "I've been careful. It doesn't interact with anything they test for in a standard tox screen unless they're specifically looking, and why would they be? Healthy 32-year-old woman, history of low blood pressure, alone in the house with a grieving husband. Medical examiner is going to call it a cardiac event and move on." He said something else after that, but I'd already stopped being able to hear properly. There was a ringing in my ears like a frequency shift, the world tilting slightly on its axis and then correcting itself. I looked down at the earrings in my palm, small gold hoops. I'd worn them at our wedding. I'm a forensic accountant. I find fraud for a living. I have sat across from men in expensive suits who looked me in the eye and lied with total conviction, and I found the thing they were hiding every single time. That part of my brain, the cold, methodical part that doesn't flinch, switched on right there on that bottom stair, and it did not switch off again for a very long time. I put the earrings in. I walked the rest of the way down the stairs normally. I went to the kitchen, picked up my phone from the counter, and opened the voice memo app. I pressed record and slid it into the shallow front pocket of my dress, where it sat warm against my hip. Then I called out toward the back porch, "That smells amazing. How long until dinner?" He came back inside with a smile that looked, if you weren't paying close attention, exactly like a smile I'd been falling for since I was 24 years old. 20 minutes, he said. Cocktail first. You're going to love it. He handed me a coupe glass, pale yellow, with a thin curl of grapefruit peel draped over the rim. It looked genuinely beautiful. He'd clearly practiced the pour. He was watching me with an expectancy that I now understood was not a husband hoping his wife would enjoy his first attempt at mixology. I raised the glass. "This is so sweet," I said. "Thank you." "Of course." He picked up his own glass, straight bourbon, his usual, and tapped it against mine. "To 7 years." "To 7 years," I said. I brought the glass to my lips and tilted it. I let the liquid touch my mouth but did not swallow. Then I turned slightly toward the counter, pretending to set something down, and spit what I'd taken in into a paper towel I palmed into the trash in one motion. I've never been particularly graceful, but I've spent 15 years in rooms where I cannot let anyone see what I know, and you learn to move in ways that don't announce themselves. We sat down to dinner. He'd made chicken piccata. It was objectively very good. I ate all of it. I talked about my week, a client in Schaumburg, a deposition I had coming up. I asked about his. He'd been consulting, a vague word he'd started using about 18 months ago after the company he worked for restructured and his position was quietly eliminated. He talked about a potential contract, same one he'd been mentioning for 6 months, perpetually 2 weeks from being finalized. Across the table, I watched his face the way I watch a spreadsheet, looking for the micro expressions, the small hitches, the way his eyes moved to me and then away just slightly too fast, recalibrating. He was waiting for something to happen to me. I could see him waiting. At 8 o'clock, he offered to clear the dishes. I said I'd help. I watched him watch me carry plates to the sink. At 8:15, he suggested we take our drinks to the living room, and I noticed him glance at me carefully when I reached for my glass. I didn't reach for it. I said I was a little tired and maybe just wanted to sit down. He suggested I lie on the couch. He got me a blanket. He sat in the chair across from me with his bourbon and he talked, easily, naturally, about renovating the back bathroom, about whether we should visit his parents in Phoenix for Thanksgiving, about a documentary he thought I'd like. His voice never wavered. He is a very good liar. I want you to understand that because it matters. He is genuinely, masterfully good at it, and I had not known. At 9 o'clock, I told him I had a work call I needed to take in the office. A client in a different time zone, I said, something I'd forgotten to mention. He seemed surprised, maybe slightly off script, but let me go. I went upstairs. I closed the office door, sat down at my desk, and let myself shake for exactly 90 seconds. Then I stopped. I called my best friend from the firm's backup line. She's a CPA, not a forensic accountant, but she's known me for 11 years, and she's exactly the kind of person you call when you need someone who will not panic and will not ask unnecessary questions. I told her what I'd heard. She was silent for a long moment. "Are you safe right now?" she said. "Yes," I said. "I didn't drink it. You need to get out of that house. I need 48 hours first." She knew what I meant. She didn't like it, but she knew. I spent that night doing what I do best. While my husband slept, I went through everything. Our joint accounts, the credit cards, the investment portfolio I'd believed was a shared one. Forensic accounting is not exciting work. It is slow and it is detailed and it requires a tolerance for tedium that most people don't have. But that night, what I found in our finances was not tedious. It was a document of a parallel life. A separate savings account I'd never seen opened 14 months ago, with transfers pulled from our joint checking in amounts small enough to avoid triggering alerts. $200 here, $350 there, routed through a business account for a consulting LLC he'd filed under his mother's maiden name. $260,000 accumulated while he mentioned casually every few months that money was tight. There was a name attached to several wire transfers. A woman. I searched her and found her easily. A paralegal at a firm in the West Loop, 30 years old, Instagram set to public, photos going back about 16 months. The timestamps of her posts occasionally overlapped with business trips he'd told me he'd taken to Indianapolis, to Kansas City. I photographed everything. I emailed the files to 3 separate accounts, my personal one, my work account, and one I created that night through a privacy-focused email service. I wrote down the name of the LLC, the account numbers, the transfer dates. I saved the voice memo from my pocket to all 3 accounts and a cloud backup. Then I went back to bed. I lay next to him in the dark and listened to him breathe and thought about 7 years of Christmases, of fights about whose turn it was to call the plumber, of the way he'd held my hand in the waiting room when we thought my mother might have had a stroke 2 winters ago. It wasn't real. I'm not sure any of it was. But grief doesn't wait for permission, and I spent that night feeling something close to it anyway. In the morning, I told him I needed to go into the office. A Saturday. Unusual, but not unheard of for me during filing season. He made toast and said he'd probably go golfing. He kissed me on the forehead when I left. I did not flinch. I went to the office. I called my attorney from a conference room with the door closed. She is a woman I'd met through a professional network 3 years ago. Very sharp, and she answered on the second ring because she always answers on the second ring. I told her what I had. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Don't go back to that house until we've talked through this." I didn't. I checked into a Hampton Inn in Oakbrook and I stayed there for 4 days. I'll compress what happened over the next several weeks because the details are both exhausting and not the point. I filed a police report. The detective assigned to the case was a woman, mid-40s, who had a particular talent for appearing entirely unimpressed while she was, in fact, cataloguing everything you said. She listened to the voice memo twice. She asked about the cocktail, which was gone. He'd cleaned up naturally. But my not having consumed it was actually useful because a tox screen on me came back clean, which meant I was not in the complicated position of explaining why I was alive when I wasn't supposed to be. The investigation went quickly once the financial records were subpoenaed, the LLC, the transfers, the life insurance policy I hadn't known existed, a $2 million payout payable to him, taken out without my knowledge through a broker I'd never heard of, on a form that had what appeared to be my signature, but which my handwriting analyst confirmed was not mine. Insurance fraud in addition to everything else. The paralegal was interviewed. She knew about the plan. Not all of it, not the part about the drink, but she had known he was planning to leave me, had known about the insurance policy, had exchanged messages about what their life would look like after. She hired her own attorney immediately and negotiated to cooperate in exchange for limited charges. His mother, a woman who had looked at me for 7 years with the particular expression of someone tolerating a mediocre Thanksgiving side dish, called me twice while he was in county. I didn't answer either time. The second voicemail she left said, among other things, that I had always been cold and that I'd probably driven him to it and that a real wife would find a way to forgive. I saved that voicemail. My attorney found it useful. The moment that nearly broke me was not the arrest, or the court dates, or the very terrible afternoon his sister called me crying, wanting me to explain what had happened in a way that would make it make sense to her. It was a Tuesday evening, 6 weeks after I'd left the house, when I was sitting in the Hampton Inn eating room temperature Thai food and scrolling through the saved photos from my phone, not the financial documents, but the personal photos, the regular ones, from vacations and holidays and just ordinary Saturdays, and I got to one from 3 years ago of the 2 of us at a friend's wedding in Asheville. He has his arm around me and we're both laughing at something off camera. And it looks, objectively, like a photograph of 2 people who are happy. I put my phone face down on the bed and sat with that for a long time. I'm not going to tell you I never cried. I cried quite a lot, in private, in specific concentrated intervals, the way I've always processed difficult things. What I did not do was let it cloud what needed to happen next. He was charged with attempted murder, insurance fraud, and forgery. The voice memo was the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. His attorney attempted to argue that the recording was taken without consent, which is a legitimate legal question in Illinois, a 2-party consent state. But the prosecutor argued successfully that the conversation had been audible enough to be an overheard statement rather than a private recording, and the judge agreed it was admissible. The financial documents I'd photographed combined with the subpoenaed records painted a picture that his attorney could not effectively counter. He did not testify. His attorney advised against it, which was the right call, because there was no version of his taking the stand that ended well for him. The paralegal testified under her cooperation agreement, confirming the conversations about the insurance money, the timeline, the LLC. She cried during parts of it. I don't know what was genuine and what was performance. I sat at the plaintiff's table and kept my expression neutral and professional, which is something I've had a lot of practice doing. His mother came to every day of the trial. She sat 3 rows behind the defense table and stared at me with an intensity that my attorney flagged to the bailiff on day 2. On the 4th day, she stood up during the prosecution's closing and said something I couldn't make it out fully, just heard the word liar, and was removed from the courtroom. Her removal did not appear to help the defense. The verdict took the jury a day and a half. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing came 6 weeks later. 14 years on the attempted murder charge, with the fraud and forgery counts running concurrently. His attorney immediately announced plans to appeal. My attorney told me that was standard and that I shouldn't worry about it, which I appreciated her saying even if it didn't fully work. The divorce was filed while the criminal case was still pending and finalized 4 months after sentencing. The house sold in 11 days. It's a decent market in Naperville, even now. I got the accounts, the investments, the equity. The court also ordered repayment of the funds diverted into the LLC, though collecting on that, my attorney explained, would be a longer process. I gave notice at my firm 2 months after the sentencing. Not because anything had gone wrong there. They'd been genuinely supportive in the quiet professional way that good firms are, but because I needed to not be in the same city for a while. I needed to be somewhere that didn't have a Hampton Inn I associated with eating cold pad see ew on a Tuesday night and trying to understand how I had gotten here. I moved to Portland. I had a friend there from graduate school, and she'd been texting me since the arrest asking when I was coming, and eventually the answer was August. I drove out with my 2 cats in a rented SUV, taking 3 days, stopping in Sioux Falls and Bozeman. The Bozeman stop was unplanned. I just liked the look of it from the highway, and I ate dinner at a bar by myself and talked to an older man from Billings who was in town for a granddaughter's graduation. And he asked me what brought me through, and I said I was moving somewhere new, and he said, "That's the best kind of reason to drive across the country," and I thought about that for the rest of the trip. I do independent consulting now. Fraud detection, mostly for nonprofits and small businesses that can't afford a full forensic firm. Organizations that have always been underserved and where the fraud, when it exists, tends to be personal and devastating in ways that large corporate fraud isn't. I work from a small apartment in the Selwood neighborhood. I have a good coffee shop 3 blocks away and a farmer's market on Sundays and a therapist I see every other week who has, over the past year, helped me significantly. My best friend from the firm came to visit last spring. We sat on my little back patio with wine and she asked me, carefully, the way she does everything, whether I was angry. Not at him specifically, but at myself. For not seeing it. I thought about it for a while before I answered. I don't think I didn't see it, I said finally. I think I saw things and decided what they probably meant before I let myself consider what else they might mean. And that's different. That's a choice I made over and over, because the alternative was a life I wasn't ready to look at. She nodded. She didn't say anything reassuring or tidy. She just nodded, and I was grateful for that. There's one more thing I want to say. For anyone listening to this who recognizes something in what I've described, not the specifics, but the texture of it, the feeling of standing on a stair and understanding all at once that the story you've been living in is not the story you thought it was. The way the world doesn't fall apart the way you think it would. The way you keep breathing. The way your hands keep doing things. Holding earrings, pressing record, carrying plates to the sink, even while the rest of you is catching up. You are more capable than the moment you're in. I needed someone to tell me that, so I'm telling you. I am 33 years old. I live in a good city with 2 difficult cats and work I find genuinely meaningful. The gap between where I was and where I am is only 14 months, which still surprises me when I count it, not because it seems too long, but because it seems too long, but because it seems so short for the distance I've covered. Last week I went to the farmer's market and bought dahlias and put them in the glass vase I'd taken when I cleared out the house. They're sitting on my kitchen table right now. I don't think about where the vase came from anymore. It's just a vase. It holds flowers. That's enough. I keep coming back to that staircase. The third step from the bottom, the one I'd learned to skip. The earrings in my palm. The 4 inches of open sliding door. So many times in the months after, I thought about how differently things would have gone if I'd taken a different route downstairs, or if I'd been wearing earbuds, or if I'd been wearing earbuds, or if I'd just called out to him from the hallway instead of stopping. The margin was that thin, and I don't say that to be dramatic. I say it because I think we misunderstand how much of what happens to us is decided in moments we're barely paying attention to. What saved me wasn't luck exactly. It was that I had spent years building the kind of mind that could function under pressure, not because I knew something like this was coming. I didn't, not consciously, but because I had chosen over and over to do work that required me to think carefully and honestly, even when it was uncomfortable. That habit didn't stay in the office. It came home with me. It stood on that staircase with me and said, "Stay still, stay quiet. Figure out what you actually know before you do anything." I think about integrity a lot differently now than I did before. I used to think of it as a quality you either had or didn't, something fixed in a person's character. What I understand now is that integrity is a practice. My husband practiced deception for at least 14 months, small decisions, daily ones, each one reinforcing the next, until the whole shape of him had changed and I hadn't seen it because I wasn't looking. And I practiced something else without knowing it. I practiced telling the truth to myself, even when it was inconvenient, even when I wanted to look away. That practice was what let me act clearly when clarity mattered most. The intelligence I'm most grateful for isn't the professional kind, the certifications and the training. It's the slower kind, the willingness to sit with something I didn't understand and not rush to make it comfortable. When I heard his voice on that porch, I didn't scream, didn't confront him, didn't make a move I couldn't take back. I waited, I thought, I asked myself what I actually knew and what I needed to know next. That kind of thinking is available to anyone, but you have to practice it when the stakes are low, so it's there when they're not. And then there's the part I find hardest to talk about, which is the getting back up part. Not the dramatic version, not surviving the night, not testifying at trial, but the ordinary Tuesday version, the Hampton Inn, the cold pad thai. The photo of the 2 of us in Asheville that I had to put face down on the bed because I couldn't look at it. That is where the real work was, not the evidence gathering, but the choosing every day for months to get up and continue anyway. To move to a city I'd never lived in and learn where the good coffee was and go to the farmer's market alone until it didn't feel lonely anymore. I have dahlias on my kitchen table right now. I bought them myself. That is not a small thing, even if it looks like one. If there is anything I want someone to take from what happened to me, it's this. The qualities that got me through, the honesty, the clear thinking, the refusal to stop, those are not special. They are not gifts I was born with. They were built slowly through choices I made long before I ever needed them. You are building something right now, whether you know it or not. Build carefully.